Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sai here today to discuss with you part of our new module, which is France and Revolution. And this will be the first video in a series exploring the cause of the revolution between the timeline of 1774 to 1789. In this one, we're going to be looking at the role of the estates and the societal structure that permeates throughout the ancien regime in France in this era. If you haven't already, do check out the previous video in this series where we went over the background about the revolution and the general context up to 1774, so we're very clear of how France is by 1774 in itself. But with all that said, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So in this video, we're going to be exploring what exactly French society was like in the 18th century. It's very important to understand how it was structured and also to understand what exactly the three estates are. I summarized them briefly towards the end of my previous video, but I think it's very important we go over exactly what we meant by first, second, and third estate, who exactly is within these third estate, what does it mean to be a noble, what are the clergymen, how vast is the peasantry in France in this era. And then once we've done that, we can then think about the long term, about how this sort of structure in society may contribute towards causing the revolution that is inevitably going to occur by 1789. As said, there are three parts to this estate structure, and it's very important we go over briefly again what they are. And to help understand that, I think it's always important for us as historians to try and use some primary sources. As always, I'm going to be interspersing a few of these throughout my series. And this one, we're going to look at this image here on the left. Now, before I even say anything about it, I think it's always valuable for you as the historian to also have a go yourself. Again, don't just take my word for this. Try and infer what exactly can you see happening in this image? What characters or symbols can you see represented here? What could it try? What could this artist be trying to tell us, or cartoonists maybe, be trying to tell us about French society at this time? Again, inference is such a very important skill, and it's one I think students, when they master, are really good at it. But until they really understand an inference, until they have the independence to do it themselves, admittedly, we can become very reliant on what the qualified historian says. But I want you to have a go first yourself. Feel free to pause the video and have a think yourself. And then once you think you're ready, once you maybe annotated some notes, wrote down what you think each one of them mean, you can then play the video again and I'll share the answers with you. Okay, so hopefully you had a good look at the image, hopefully figured some things out. Let's discuss it now as a class. So these two men, they're very clearly above this third man here. They're crushing this man under a rock. And these two men here, they very clearly represent the first and second estates. The first and second estates are the clergy and nobility, respectively. And they're using their influence, they're using their power to make sure the third estate is very much oppressed. You may have noticed the general background of the image is very important as well. It look like we've got some sort of fields in the background, maybe wheat and barley. They're very much associated with the third estate because they represent the peasantry, the workers who are on those lands, in those fields, and of course making sure the crops grow and of course are picked. And so it's very important to understand that the third estate is the economic backbone of French society. They're the reason crops grow, they're the reason food can be ate, the reason trade happens, merchants are successful. A lot of it relies on the people, but yet this cartoonist here is very much suggesting the first and second estate, while then appreciating the third estate's work, they're actively oppressing and controlling them. You'll see as well there's something called the corvée, that is untale, that is actually oppressing. That's what this rock represents. These are French words for types of taxation. And so the first and second estate, the clergy and nobility, they're using their influence to tax the third estate and take all their wealth from them. And through that, it quite literally is crushing the life out of the third estate and what it's trying to achieve. And of course, more generally, it shows the first and second estate are more powerful than the third estate. But in doing so, they have to work together to do it, which of course may imply the third estate could indeed overpower them one on their own. We're also going to see the third estate is actually the biggest population group within France. And so it's very interesting that it's only through economic and political power that the third estate is also oppressed. Perhaps it could be otherwise if things were different. This indeed already could be a clear sign of why revolution may occur. If one massive group in society feels unfairly belittled and even abused and oppressed by the others around them. So, to understand that image further, let's bring some context in this. Let's try and understand the structure of French society. Now, the four-piece version I gave you last lesson is very simple. You have Louis and the royal ministers right at the top. They're the monarchy. They have divine right of kings. They're very much endowed by God, or so they believe, to be so powerful and so great. And so, because of that, you then get the other three estates below them. We have the first estate represented by the clergy, obviously with their massive influence in religion. They are right under there with the king. Then we have the nobles, the landed gentry, as they would be called in Britain. They are the ones who own the land. They are the richest. They've inherited their wealth. Then we have the third estate, which contains the peasantry and pretty much everyone else who is in French society. That's it in the general sense. But let's get some more detail. Let's find out exactly who these three estates actually are. So the first estate, which is the Catholic Church, but also contains the secular clergy. Now, the first estate represents the Catholic Church above all else. They, of course, have the majority of members which are part of many religious orders. We have monks, nuns, parish priests, the curé, who represent those who are secular in society in France as well. And now their action is they work around the country. The bishops especially have the most influence. They are the most wealthy. As said there, they own 10% of land all throughout France, and they work to promote their religion, predominantly Catholicism, but they also provide education and healthcare throughout the nation. For their services, though, throughout their churches, official government policy actually gives them many privileges. Not only are they very much revered throughout the parishes they serve because of their religious position, but also the king rewards them with exemption from taxes. He actually allows them to not pay any taxes at all. However, in return for this, he asks that they gift him a don gratuit, which is a gift to him as the monarch, which tends to be a fair bit of sum of money, but is predominantly covered by the third estate's taxes. We mentioned before how the third estate have to pay a vast amount of taxes to, of course, the first and second estates. And so 10% of the third estate's earnings are paid as taxes to the church in this thing called a tiff tax. And so through that, the first estate can then use that to pay their don gratuit gift towards the king, and therefore, in effect, they're not actually losing any money or wealth themselves. Their gift is actually being taxed out through the third estate to be given to the king anyway. They're also very much resented by many in society for this. In fact, one major complaint is that they are absent. They are absentees throughout society, will supervise no more than one area, but rarely, if ever, be seen. The TIF tax as well also takes lots of money from the already poor third estate, and therefore because it's going to these rich abbots and monasteries, it therefore creates resentment among the working people towards the religious orders. The fact that the first estate themselves don't even pay any sort of real tax, the fact that Don gratuit is in itself a gift, therefore means many people resent the first estate despite their religious and political influence. We then have the second estate, which contains roughly 300,000 of France's 28 million people, and so is, of course, bigger than the first estate, but still in the grand vast of the society, it's still rather quite small. The second estate, as the name would suggest, contain all the nobles throughout France. These are the ones who have inherited their titles, their land, their wealth throughout many generations. They've cultivated their power during the Bourbon monarchy right back in the 13th century and still have many of it by 1774. This reliance on primogeniture leads many to believe that they, of course, they've not really earned their position. I mean, when you think of your generations on and you've just inherited all this wealth because your family happened to be rich, again, it doesn't really bode well for many people supporting you in the present day. They also have inherited many privileges as well. They, of course, hold much power as landowners. They have a lot of government influence with having ministers in very important positions. You'll also find a lot of the nobility can get into the royal courts at Versailles, where they therefore have presence and therefore influence towards the monarch himself. They are easily some of the richest and most powerful people throughout France, predominantly male as well, given how primogeniture means the males in the family tend to inherit the wealth as well. They also don't pay taxes despite owning over 30% of France's land. And also, they are even exempt from military service and also don't have to pay in any sort of public courts. They also have the corvée, so they can take a land tax from the poor as well, particularly the third estate. And they, in general, just hold monopolies over all of society. The worst part of all is they use the military to take harvest and money from the poor themselves. The poor, as we said, have very little already, and this is already squeezed out of them by the second estate using the military to get their harvest. And we have the third but by no means least estate, which is the peasantry. And this is quite a vast one. It contains 27 million people in France. And it's not just the peasants and the land workers. We have the sans-culottes, who are the urban workers, but the bourgeoisie, the educated in the city as well. And so it's quite a vast, quite a expansive group to be considered in France. But it also makes them difficult to be united. Because while you might initially think, well, there's 27 million of them, they could all unite against the first and second estate. They're also not identical. They're also very different people with all very different goals in society, which is why up until 1774, you may be able to argue there's been no revolution yet, because they simply are not united. They have no real political or economic power. The vast majority of the peasantry, for instance, have to work around 16 hours a day on their farms to be given permission to live on the land the first and second estates own. The urban workers, like the sans-culottes, also work in the cities and try and make a life for themselves there. However, the richest of this class are the educated bourgeoisie. There's the bankers, traders, the merchants who have the ability to be able to earn a better life for themselves. But compared to the wealth of the first and second estates, it's not that much. The bourgeoisie represents the middle class in the society, and arguably the ones who know their position, know they could have it better because they have the education to do so, but still lack any sort of power or recognition from the king for their efforts. All of them have to pay vast amount of taxes or corvées despite not owning any land on which they lived. This means the peasants especially resent their position in society, but lack the power to change it. They are literally entrapped by the nobles' feudal dues that they are forced to pay. They have no privileges, no real say in how society works, and because the majority of them are indeed uneducated, they pretty much accept their position at the bottom of France's social hierarchy. They accept that it's just the natural order, that the king is God on earth, and they're his mere peasants at the bottom hoping for his graciousness. But as I said, the bourgeoisie are more educated than that, and they know things can change. We're going to talk about something called the Enlightenment in our future video, which will very much affects the bourgeoisie and inspires them to want change. So how does this all even link to causing the revolution? Well, it's a clear sign of structural inequality. We already mentioned in the previous video that France's society with the free estates is very much unequal. But because of this, we now clearly see that the vast majority of France's citizens are poor, overworked, and underappreciated, with no chance of ever improving their position in society. Again, this isn't a democracy, this isn't capitalism. They have no way to improve their wealth because they're forced into a structural hierarchy that keeps them trapped and keeps them poor and at the bottom. The rich in society, likewise, also have laws that protect them, that keep them safe. They, of course, have no taxes to pay. The first they have the don gratuit. That's the most they've got to pay as a little gift, which is arguably optional anyway. And then because of the taxation system that's in place, it's the third estate who take all the economic burden on anyway. The first and second are pretty much free from any economic or even social pressure that their position would naturally force them to pay, which is very paradoxical. The peasantry are the poorest in society, but they bear the brunt of the nation's taxes, work, and labour. This sort of system, maybe I already tell, is not sustainable. It's also not helped that at the very top of society, Louis XVI and his royal courts are not even acknowledging the situation rather than sharing any of it or being around the third estate's problems. He's sheltered. He's hidden away in his palace in Versailles, isolated miles away from the city itself, and very much ignorant, if not apathetic, to the problems that they face. And so this is just one clear cause of the revolution, societal and structural inequality. And as we'll see, the grievances of the third estate and the clear corruption, some may say, of the first and second estate only becomes more clear as time passes on. Again, we're only in 1774 here. We have 25 years to explore, and therefore lots can happen in this period of time. But that's what we're going to explore in our future videos. Thank you as always for watching these videos. I hope you'll find them useful as we're going around. Perhaps you'd like to respond in the comments. Already, can you see how the structural inequality in France is already a clear cause of revolution? And then this is arguably going to be a long-term cause. But again, this may change. There may be one that comes about later on. As always, do check out the following video or previous videos in the series. This has been History with Sire. Thank you for listening.